Welcome everyone to our Savvy Ladies Wednesday Wisdom webinar. My name is Maggie Montemuro and I'm the Marketing Coordinator at Savvy Ladies. If you have questions during this presentation, please type them into the chat window. Or if you're joining us by phone, you can email your question to info@savvyladies.org. Our presenter today is Sandi Amorello, author of The Irreverent Widow: Shockingly True Tales of Love, Death, and Dating with Children in Tow. Sandi's mission is to help women align with their authentic state of well-being. She offers inspiration, wit, wisdom, and support. We're so thankful that you can join us today, Sandi, and I'll hand it over to you now.
Well, thank you, Maggie. I am really happy to be here, and hi to everyone who's joining us today. Today, we are talking about moving forward with your life after you've gone through some kind of loss or maybe an unexpected change. And my plan is to leave you today feeling a little bit more inspired, motivated, supported, and hopefully with a smile on your face. So let's get going. First of all, life does not always go quite as we plan, does it? I'm sure your life hasn't. I know mine definitely has not gone as I planned. I thought for a while it was going totally as planned. I had a perfectly imperfect marriage to a man I treasured and adored, who I met in college. We even had kind of the white picket fence at one point and the 3 kids. I guess that's a half a kid more than standard issue. And we're kind of going along day to day and everything seems great. And then, oops, all of a sudden he had pancreatic cancer and he was 40 years old. And 2.5 years later, I was alone with my 3 little kids instead of with him raising them. So these things happen to us and our life just gets turned upside down, totally out of the blue. Those things that you think, it always happens to someone else and suddenly it's happening to you, whether it's being widowed, whether it's your husband running off with the Swedish nanny, or maybe you have run off with the Swedish nanny and maybe you've lost your job. These things just throw us for a loop and we have to figure out how to pick ourselves up and move forward. And it can be really, really difficult. So hopefully I'm here to help with that. Truth number 1 that I have learned along the way is that loss equals change and change equals pain in most people's eyes. As a society, we don't embrace change. And the irony of it is that change is the only constant in life. And if you're constantly fighting change, you just are never going to be able to be happy. So, some of the things that cause the pain are unwanted circumstance, a feeling of a loss of control, and a fear of the unknown. For me, after Drew passed away, kind of unexpectedly, months later, I was just devastated by this feeling of not just having lost him, but I realized I felt like I was suffering 2 losses because I felt like I had also lost myself. I had lost, anything that used to bring me joy, an inner sense of joy, that was gone too. And that was just devastating to feel like I had kind of lost my soul and my creative passions. Nothing, all the stuff that used to bring me joy didn't bring me joy anymore. And when I realized that not only was he gone, but that I had lost all of those things, I was just, twice as devastated. Another huge realization was that I had that feeling of the loss of my future. And suddenly what was kind of this sparkly, bright future of us raising our kids and having this wonderful life, I had this dark abyss and didn't know what I was going to be doing next, much less, 10 years from that point. And it really is an awful feeling when you feel like you're living on shaky ground and, I always said it's akin to kind of like being inside of your Aunt Edna's like lime green jello mold and trying to look out and everything's kind of murky and jiggly and nothing feels right, and it's a hard place to be. Luckily, the other truth about change that I've learned is the positive side of it, and that is that change really is opportunity. And so the void that you're left with when you go through something traumatic, that kind of traumatic loss, and you're facing that kind of darkness, is that actually that big dark empty space is the place where all growth can occur. And once you kind of can get past that initial state of grief over whatever your loss is, if you can begin to see that, that's where all hope lies, and that is where your future lies. And it's pretty amazing. I mean, it's a place for a fresh start. It's kind of a clean slate. You can look at it as kind of a new chapter. I always use my movie clipboard because I like to think of it as a new part of my movie. My husband was a filmmaker, so I always like that kind of metaphor. And you get to be the director and the leading lady. And once you can stop crying long enough, you have this wonderful opportunity to recreate your life. Another huge truth, which I think is really the total key, is, the key to your happy future is finding the authentic you. And a lot of us go through life kind of on autopilot and we forget who we really are. And going through a huge change or loss that's traumatic, when you're kind of knocked backwards, it really is this opportunity to rediscover yourself. At least that's what I found. It's a time to be able to connect to your core or reconnect to it. Some people have never in their whole life found their, searched for who they really are. And this is the perfect opportunity. And the ways to do that, the ways that I found, were to be really loving and kind to yourself and kind of give yourself a break and allow yourself the time to concentrate on you and find yourself. Because as women especially, we are so hard on ourselves. At least I know I have discovered that I have been. And we say things in our little inner dialogue and chastise ourselves and are so hard on ourselves. Sometimes we say things to ourselves that we would never say to anyone that we loved, much less, to a good friend. We wouldn't even say that to a stranger on the street. And yet we're so hard on ourselves. So practice loving kindness, treat yourself like you are your best friend. Also, I think being playful and getting creative really helps. Spending time in silence, in nature, really has helped me connect to my core. I have had more beach walks in the last 10 years here in Maine than I don't know how many miles I probably have walked around the world a few times. Practice healthy selfishness. Selfishness has a bad rap in our society. Women especially are not supposed to be selfish. We're always supposed to be thinking of everyone else's needs. But, the real word selfish means, it's taking care of your own best interests. And I don't mean that you should feed your kids, a box of saltines and then be going out for a fancy dinner and letting them eat crackers and water. But healthy selfishness is really about knowing that if you don't take care of yourself, you can't be a good parent, a good friend, a good daughter, a good worker, a good anything. So we need to take care of ourselves first. Also celebrate your inner rebel. I have this picture of myself from when I was about 5 or 6 years old. And I kind of rediscovered this photo after I'd been widowed, and I have had it hanging above my desk in various workspaces and my studios because it is so inspirational. I think every woman needs a picture of themselves when they were, between the age of 5 and 10, before puberty kicked in and we got all screwed up about our body image and all that stuff. Because you can just see, I look at that picture and I think, oh my God, I was just so cool, so proud of myself, so full of confidence. I was just beaming. Plus, those boots are to die for. So keep a picture of yourself and put it somewhere, and picture of yourself from when you were a kid and when you just looked like you could conquer the world. It's a great way to get back in touch with your core. Journaling is very cliche, but it is cliche because it works. So if you can journal, try to write a little bit every day, you can really get in touch with who you are. And also continue to be a relentless explorer, even after you've reconnected with yourself. It is a good practice to have to stay connected. So 6 steps to help you move forward when you can barely get out of bed. This was totally true. I mean, there was a time I didn't know what to do next. I would have happily stayed in bed, like probably with a bottle of vodka and a bag of Twizzlers, if I did not, if it hadn't been for my 3 children who needed me desperately. So I didn't have a book or anything to tell me kind of how to try to move forward. I was making it up as I went along. But before we get into that, I wanted to share what I believe is the secret to true happiness. Ladies, this is the only thing that you take away from this presentation today. This is what I want you to remember. Do not hang out with pessimists, because when you are climbing up the ladder from your own pit of despair, you do not need negative people around you. Surround yourself, and I mean surround yourself, with positive, supportive, loving people. This seems like a no-brainer, but people, women especially, sometimes have trouble keeping people out of their life, and you need to just say no to people who are not adding something positive, especially when you are trying to figure out a new life for yourself and gain strength. My favorite little story about that is that when I was thinking about moving out of Massachusetts, I had this saying in my head at the time, was my mantra: leap and the net shall appear, which is a Zen Buddhist saying. And, I really believed that, and I knew I needed to change my life in some way. And Drew had been dead for about 1.5 years. I was seeing a therapist at the time. We will call her therapist number 2. And when I had come to this realization, I kind of couldn't wait for my next session with her so I could tell her. And when I excitedly told her that I had made up my mind that I was going to be moving northward, up the coast somewhere, probably to Maine, and I told her my mantra, leap and the net shall appear, and she looked at me really dryly over her glasses and said, well, at least you hope that's what will happen. So I will not tell you the thoughts that were going through my head or what I really wanted to say to her about that, but I just kind of quietly wrote her check. I fired her shortly thereafter and packed up my kids and moved to Maine, and it was one of the best decisions I ever made for my family. So, follow your own heart. Sometimes even professionals, are pessimists. So step number 1 is to honestly assess your situation and your resources. Now, the key here is honestly, like, think long and hard, because some resources are not immediately obvious. Like, think creatively. Of course, things like, stuff that you own, your money, your finances, your investments, life insurance that you might have gotten. Think also, resources also include your support system, people who care about you, who are there for you. It's also about your emotional, mental, spiritual, and physical well-being, because if any of those things need work, you need to handle that before you can kind of physically or emotionally move on. So you need to take care of those things and really assess, if you need to see someone for help with something, or if you're a physical wreck, get yourself to the doctor or take some yoga classes or do whatever you need to do to get yourself in order. Also look at your talents, skills, and strengths. Those certainly are resources that are going to help you move into the future as you decide and plan what to do next. Step number 2 is to identify your priorities and values. Now, priorities and values tend to overlap. I like to think about, or have you think about what is sacred to you. The slide here is actually a piece of art, which was I actually had created that. That was a centerpiece of my art exhibit a number of years ago. And the centerpiece was about what is sacred. It was a piece of writing I did, and that was the visual I made to go with it. And that kind of, I think, is at the center of things. What is sacred to you? Because it's different for everyone. I mean, it can be things like children, your career, the location, where you're living, creative expression, financial wealth. For me, laughter is always a big priority, and I value it. Perhaps something even as shallow as just having a really nice car can be a priority. Our priorities and values shift. Especially priorities can shift as things change in our life. And actually, your main values, core values, usually stay the same. But priorities, things like having a new car. I was dating someone maybe a year and a half after Drew passed away, one of the first people I dated. And I remember, he was a business guy, and I was so excited at one point. I had this list. I finally was figuring out what I wanted, kind of for my future or my immediate future. One of the things on the list was to move. I had suddenly realized, like, I have got to move. My husband had actually died in our house, in our bedroom. Staying there just seemed like only a crazy person would do that to themselves. So I just needed to, kind of move out of that physical space with my kids. But my other priority, another thing on the list, was to get myself a brand new car. I had never had a brand new car in my life. I suddenly had life insurance money. I had a bunch of extra, I had never had so much money in the bank as I did at that time. And that was like a drop in the bucket to get a nice new car. So he looked at my list, and I was all excited to show it to him. And he kind of scowled at me and, and then kind of scolded me, I think is what he was doing. And he told me that I should be hunkering down, thinking about work, and not thinking about things like moving or, something frivolous like a new car. Now, of course, this gentleman was divorced, hardly ever saw his kids, and was driving around in a nice Mercedes. And he was telling me that, after like a year and a half after my husband died, and I've gone through all this, that I should not, that I didn't deserve a new car. So anyway, needless to say, he did not last very long in the dating pool, and we said goodbye to him. But follow your own heart. Step number 3 is to connect with your passions. I've always felt very lucky that I'm an artist. I actually went to an art college for 4 years, and I'm a trained illustrator. And I've always had that as one of my passions. So I've always been very clear about what my passions are. Some people aren't so clear about it, and you need to really think about it. Think about what brings you joy. Think about the kinds of things that make you forget about time, things that make you feel peaceful and bring you serenity. It can be an activity, it can be a person, place, a thing, but really take time to think about that. This actually is a painting that I did, and I hadn't painted since college. And about 6 months after Drew passed away, when I was in the middle of feeling like I had lost, all of my own passions for things, I woke up one morning, this beautiful spring June morning, and I could smell the smell of like oil paint. And I knew, I could not wait to get to the art supply store. I just knew it was kind of time, like this passion was being reignited. And I started doing a little painting. And then about a month and a half later, I was in Vermont at a friend's farmhouse with my kids. And we were there for 2 entire weeks. It was lovely. And I brought all of my painting supplies. And when they were at their little summer camp one day, I started painting. And I set up this still life outside, and within, I lost, like, the whole day was gone, and all of a sudden it was, time to pick them up, and I hadn't eaten, I hadn't even thought about what time it was, and I brought the painting inside and stood it up on top of a piece of furniture, and I stood back, and I looked at it, and I just remember standing there and starting to cry, because it was like tears of pure joy that I had reconnected with something that I loved so much that I thought I had lost forever. It still gets me a little weepy when I think about it, even 13 years later. But, I think we all have those things inside of us, and we all have passion, and we need to reconnect to it or to discover it. Number 4 is to act fearlessly. So I use the word act instead of be fearless. I said act fearlessly because actually the act part of it has kind of a double meaning. First of all, you kind of do have to act, because being fearless does not usually come naturally to people. And acting, kind of fake it till you make it, that mentality is pretty much what you need to do. Because if you wait till you really feel brave enough to do something, it could take your entire lifetime. So you kind of have to fake it a little bit, and also, act, the verb of, you need to actually do something. It is an act. And you need to not wait necessarily for the inspiration to do it. I find a lot of the time that actually taking a step and, forward, doing something physically, taking action and being fearless is what kind of just promotes even more of a feeling of inspiration. So as Nike says, just do it. That is totally true. All of this kind of dovetails with kind of, inspiration and motivation and all of that good stuff. So unfortunately, a lot of people won't like to hear this, but you do need to get comfortable with change. You need to get comfortable with chaos and with taking risks. Chaos is actually the place where all possibility lives. I have dealt with chaos in different forms during much of my life, and a lot of people are very uncomfortable with it. I'm kind of comfortable with it, and I have learned that when there's chaos, that means there pretty much are no rules that you're following, and you get to make it up, and you get to create whatever you want, and that's a very powerful place to be. So be fearless, just do it, become adventure friendly, and try not to be too attached to outcome, because once you put something in motion, it doesn't always end up the way you planned, but it can still end up being something very, very positive. So try not to be too attached to actually the outcome. Number 5, be open to inspiration. Let's see. I'm sorry. Okay, the key word here is open. You need to have an open mind, an open heart. You need to have awareness. I love how much more aware I've become of the synchronicity of events. Sometimes once you just take one action, like my deciding to move to Maine was a huge decision for me. I was moving farther away from family, taking my kids to a place where I pretty much knew no one. But that one action took so much courage, but it led to this whole sequence of events that I probably never would have imagined happening in my life. So it's pretty amazing. I think once you become aware of how things are connected and the synchronicity that happens within your life, you begin to see each person and event that comes into your life as kind of this question mark. Like, when someone comes into my life, especially in kind of an odd way these days, I always look at them and I think, okay, you're in my life for some reason, and I'm going to find out eventually what that reason is. Of course, once in a while, somebody's not in your life for any good reason, it seems, but I think more often than not, people kind of circle in and out of your life, or events come into your life that you're drawn in a certain direction, and it's a pretty amazing thing. So try to be aware. This little visual, the vase and the tablecloth, the blanket on that slide, and part of my already mentioned painting, that's just kind of showing an example of inspiration for me was the day before I started that painting, I went antiquing in Vermont, which is one of my other passions. And I found that really cool vintage vase. And I found that kind of plaid blanket, which in my head kind of seemed like it was some, I was imagining as some romantic, like 1930s picnic blanket. And I used it for the painting. So in my art exhibit, I just kind of had those items next to the actual painting to show where my inspiration or some of it came from. Another thing that I want to mention is just, I think when you're open and see kind of how all these things come into your life and connect the dots, you begin to experience a lot more gratitude for the amazing way that events seem to unfold. Okay, the sixth step is perseverance. To me, that is the key. I mean, all the other things that you do are not going to matter unless you have this quality or can persevere. Because as this sign says, which actually was on a tree when I was on a nature walk with my family one Thanksgiving, my mom's house in New Jersey. Nature trail contains rugged terrain. Well, we all know, there are lots of bumps in the road. And when you're trying to move forward and make something happen, you are still going to keep hitting more bumps in the road. And to get through all of that, you need to have physical energy. You need to tap into your mental energy, emotional energy. Some of the other elements of perseverance for me are related to love and devotion, commitment, and having patience with yourself and with a situation, putting the time in to actually let it come to fruition are all really important things. I just want to share one example, and that was the one thing that I did in my life most recently that I've mentioned a few times already, was moving from right outside of Boston, moving my 3 kids and assorted pets up to Maine to this kind of totally new place. And I had to pack up a 4-bedroom house, the 3 kids, the animals. It was a house filled with all of my late husband's things. I had to try to sell things, get rid of things, sell the house on my own. I mean, I did all this. It all happened in an amazingly short period of time. I mean, I think it was like 4 or 5 months from the day I put the house up for sale till the day we were moved into a house in Maine. It was, and when I put my house on the market, I didn't even know where I was moving to exactly. So it was amazing. But, that was a really difficult thing, packing up that house. It took enormous physical energy. It took even more, just a huge amount of emotional energy packing up and sifting through stuff. And, I was in the middle of all of this grief still, and then packing up and looking at all these things and remembering Drew. I mean, I'm sure I was crying all over the cardboard boxes most of the time. But, I didn't give up. We made it happen, and there was enormous satisfaction in that. So being able to persevere and get something done is amazing. I mean, when you do things like that, the same kind of thing happened to me when I was getting my kids set up in the school system up here, and I hadn't moved here yet, but I was meeting with the principal, and I just happened to have broken up with the gentleman I was dating in Maine, and I wasn't moving here because of him, but I think he was a little freaked out that I was moving, within like a 45-minute drive of his house. And he was kind of trying to talk me out of moving here. And on that day, I drove my SUV to the elementary school here outside of Portland. And I just remember, being from the Boston area, I'm all dressed up. I have my pumps on and, a raincoat, it's pouring, and I'm in a skirt, and, I couldn't find the answers to the school. And I finally parked in some lot, and I stepped out of my car and literally stepped into the muddy grass, and my heels sunk in, and I'm drenched, and I had no umbrella. And I was just about ready to start crying and turn around and say, you know what, forget it. I must be meant to stay in Massachusetts. And instead, something kicked in. I felt like Norma Ray, like Sally Field in that Norma Ray movie. I marched across the muddy grass. By the time I got in to see the principal, I was just like drenched like a drowned dog. And I think he gave me a towel and I took off my muddy shoes. And I'm sure he thought I was some lunatic from Boston. But those kinds of stories, when we have those stories, then when we are going through another tough time, we can remember that we have that perseverance inside of us and that we have that ability. And it is totally empowering to be able to remember those things. Okay, I want to touch upon money since Savvy Ladies is all about financial empowerment. I just want to say, this is a little my confession time because I made some really good decisions and some pretty not so great decisions. One of the good things about, one of the good things about extraordinary grief is that it can make you see how unimportant money really is in the grand scheme of our lives compared to people and all those other things. But one of the bad things about extraordinary grief is that it also makes you, see that money isn't that important. And for me, it just meant I just kind of stopped paying attention to money. I had some life insurance money. I knew that we could be comfortable for quite a while. Fortunately, that was a great gift. But all kinds of things happen when you are grieving and dealing with money, and whatever your money buttons are, they will get pushed. I had one small essay written about money that was going to go into my book, and my editor read it and he said to me, "You are going to write an entire chapter on money." And I almost cried because honestly, it was the hardest thing that I had to write. That whole book, I mean, writing about my husband being on his deathbed was not as difficult as writing about my relationship with money and really being honest with myself about it. The one good thing I did was I did remain aligned with my priorities and my values. I knew that I wanted to use the money that we had been left, or the money that I had. I wanted to be able to stay home with my kids because they were very young. My husband and I both planned on, one of us kind of back and forthing, being with our kids and not having anybody in daycare. So I wanted to kind of stick to that commitment and use the money in that way. I felt very positive about that, to be able to be here for them. But, I was not an active participant in my financial well-being. And that is really important. There was a time when I did not even open my statements from my financial advisor. I mean, part of it was probably during the 2008 money debacle. And I think I didn't open them for, it must have been 8 or 9 months. And one day my advisor called me and was just kind of apologizing. And he sounded so sad. I thought someone had died in his family. And my attitude was kind of always like, well, my husband died, money, who cares about money? And, nothing's worse than your husband die, until I opened, the statement, and after he had called me, and I had lost half of my money. And maybe opening the statements or talking to him along the way wouldn't have really changed what happened, because the entire economy was, in a huge mess at that time. But I still feel that, if I would have been paying a little more attention, I probably would have had a lot more money sitting around right now. You also can fall into kind of unhealthy money patterns, especially when you're really vulnerable while you're grieving. And I definitely fell into that kind of patriarchal thing of, all of my advisors over the years were men, and I really wish I would have spent a little more time searching for the right fit for me. Maybe it would have been a woman that would have been a better fit for me. I'm not sure. There are a lot of wonderful male financial advisors, but I just didn't really spend time being very picky, and I should have been, or I wish I would have been. when I would want money, I would be emailing or calling my advisor, and I always ended up feeling like I was a, 14-year-old asking my father for allowance money. So, here I was, a 40-something-year-old woman raising three kids, perfectly capable, running my own life, and I was acting like a child when it came to money. And that's been really hard for me to kind of admit to myself, why I was doing that. But I would fall into these really unhealthy patterns with men and money. And, I kind of had to take back my power and learn from that. So I think, learning from our past money errors, I mean, we have to own our choices. I truly believe that. I am not sorry about the choices I made with how I spent a lot of the money so I could be with my kids and do things with them and have experiences with them. And we all have to go by what our values are. But, I definitely did not act like a total grown up, and I have been changing that. And I just think it's really important for us to be able to all talk honestly about this, because there's a lot of shame and guilt that goes along with our money choices. And, shame is just not an option. No one, that is such a bad kind of energy to have. And, the more we share with each other, I think the stronger that we all become. So, moving on, in order to move joyfully toward your future, what I believe is that we need to adjust our view. If you can view the forces of change as a positive catalyst and see the silver lining kind of in your chaos or in that situation, rather than just the negatives, um, that's a wonderful and much, of course, more positive way to view life, and allows you to move forward. Viewing your future as an opportunity instead of a big black abyss, seeing it as a place where new adventure and possibility exists, is one of the ways that you were able to joyfully move toward your future. As far as thinking about your past and memories, I am, part of me, I kind of waffle, part of me is a live for the moment kind of person and don't focus on the past. And, the past means nothing. But the bigger part of me, I am a believer in the power of positive memories. I am a believer in, having things that remind you of positive experiences from your past, tangible reminders. And, I kind of think if we can think of our memories as kind of these little souvenirs from our past and focus only on the ones that bring you joy, I think that's where the power lies, instead of getting caught up in the sadness or sad things that have happened from our past. So the last thing I want to say is that when the going gets tough, you're having a really bad day, even though you're making progress moving forward, we all have setbacks. When you're having a really crummy day, just remember that out of all of this mess that you're in the midst of, perspective is the ultimate gift. And not everyone gains perspective early in life. Some people go through their entire life and never really have gained much perspective. So I have seen it as this amazing gift that at the age of 41, I was given this amazing perspective about what is important in life. The the worst thing that I could happen to, that I could imagine happening already happened to me, and I was only 41. It was like, well, I don't have to worry about that anymore. That's over. So everything else feels like, could not be that bad. You get great clarity regarding what is truly important in life. A lot of people say, oh, I know what's important in life. But, until you go through something kind of devastating or life changing, it hasn't really sunken in. You also get to lighten up and not take things so seriously. That is my favorite, kind of blessing about perspective, is it allows you, when I get a call from a teacher saying, oh, we're worried because your child has been tardy 8 times. And in my head, I'm thinking, you're lucky he's getting to school at all, especially when I was grieving very heavily. and my mantra is usually, okay, if it's not cancer, it's not that important. It's something that we can deal with. Um, and the best thing about perspective is that, it officially makes you one very wise woman, and no one can ever take that away from you. So thank you for joining me today. I really had so much fun doing this. I hope that I left you in good spirits and feeling inspired. And you can find more of me and contact me through my websites, which I've listed here, and you can find more information, my blog and my book, and whatever tidbits of wisdom I have to share. I'm also lurking about on Facebook and Twitter sometimes, so you can find me there. And my book is on Amazon. So thank you so much.
Thanks, Sandy. That was very inspiring, very helpful. Do you have time to answer a couple questions?
Certainly.
Okay, great. We had some that came in. This first question is, you said your secret to true happiness is not hanging out with pessimists, but I feel that my family's support system is made up of pessimists. So what can I do about that?
Well, that is a really tough one because I'm going to say right, live here that I've had that trouble with my brother, and unfortunately, I kind of had to distance myself a little bit. I have found that, of course, with family, we don't want to cut ourselves totally off from them, but I think when we're looking out for our own well-being, I think we need to find other sources for, for our inspiration and happiness, and for other people to support us. I've been going through that actually recently in the stage that I'm in right now with my kids starting to go off to college and stuff like that. And, I have some family problems going on, and, I know I said I need to get out there more, spend more time with my friends, and really focus on the people who just always kind of make me feel wonderful inside and bring me joy. And I think, we can still maintain relationships with family, but I think you have to kind of limit it to the amount of contact that allows you to, to still feel okay.
Mm-hmm.
That
Okay.
would be my advice.
Okay, thank you. And we had some questions come in about support groups. So can we get your thoughts on those, both the in-person kind and the more virtual kind?
Oh, certainly. Was it about kind of recommendations or the value of them, or?
I think more the value of them.
I I had attended a couple of support groups after I was widowed, and I know everyone has a different experience. I I did write some of my favorite stories that I've written are about the support group. And I will just say that one of them at the end, I said, I probably would have been better buying just a good underwire bra than, than what I got out of that particular support group. I think that, we all need support. And I think there weren't too many support groups for young widows when I was widowed, and it was really difficult. Because most of the people in those groups had grown kids, or they were much, much older. I did, one of the biggest things that I got out of going to the support groups that I did go to, it really made me realize how strong I was. And some of those people in the support groups had been widowed for years, and I couldn't imagine still kind of being in that place of kind of being stuck in that emotional space years down the road. So, if anything, it made me feel empowered. I did learn some things. I learned a lot of things about myself. So I think that support groups can be wonderful. Some people just kind of get addicted to them, I think. And that is fine for them. I mean, we all have our different needs to fill. But I can say the very best thing that happened to me at a support group was the first day I attended my first support group. I saw this woman in this bright red suit, and she just looked so sparkly and smiley, and everybody else was kind of dressed in these drab clothes, and we were all widows or widowers, and I just looked at her across the room, and I just knew like we were the only two people who looked alive, and like we still had some hope and laughter left in us, and we ended up becoming really good friends. And she had been widowed twice. And I think you can meet some amazing people if that's the only thing that you take away from a support group. Finding one new friend, I mean, that is a wonderful thing.
Hmm. Okay, great. And the next question is, after such a loss, can you talk about dating again? Because I can't imagine ever being in a relationship again.
Oh goodness. Well, I have actually discussed dating a lot, and I have admittedly done a lot of dating in the last 12 years. I think everyone is so different on that. Um, you know, Maybe because I had young kids and my husband had kind of specifically told me he wanted me to find someone, and we had been, sweethearts since high school. I mean, we'd been together over 20 years. And um, I just kind of woke up one day, and it was only about 9 months after he had passed away. And I just literally woke up one day and thought, oh my God, I have to start dating, because I just felt like if I waited too much longer or waited too many years, it would be like I just couldn't, do it. I would be so out of the loop. And that was just my personal, that was my personal experience. But I will say, I know people who, for years and years, they had no interest in dating. Some people never want to do it. I think for me, I just really enjoy being in a relationship, and I just enjoy, actually sometimes, I used to like just dating just to have something kind of to do with myself outside of being a mom and raising my kids. So I
Mhm.
think it's very, very personal.
Okay. Okay, and our other question is, I have a dear friend who is recently widowed who has shut out her inner circle of friends. What can I do to be supportive while she's grieving?
Oh, well, that is I think that's a painful situation for the friends, as well as the person who's actually grieving. And I'm sure when I was in the midst of my deepest, darkest days, I really didn't realize maybe that I was causing pain to people, who were close, who wanted maybe to be around me more and feel more supportive. From my experience, I think a lot of times, I wanted a lot of my own just kind of alone time, and you just kind of, I remember just wanting to be miserable and just wanting to wallow in it kind of. And I think that's what you need to do a lot of the time. And I think just having friends, if you're trying to support your friend, doing little things if she doesn't want to get together, but, just even, I know it sounds corny, but sending like a real letter in the mail with, it's just, that used to make me feel so good to get a letter or a little package from someone, and just to know that they were thinking about me. And to me, that was a sign of like a really good friend to me, as someone who's kind of, not pushing herself on me, maybe to fulfill her own need to help me, but really respecting, what that grieving person needs. And I can assure you, when she's ready, she will, kind of come back out into your circle. But in the meantime, I would just find, just little ways to let her know you're thinking of her and love her. Um, and when she's ready, she will, make it known, I'm sure.
Mhm. Okay, great. Well, I think we're about out of time, but we want to thank you again so much, Sandy, for such a great presentation, and we really hope it helped everyone. So thank you to everyone who joined us today and asked questions. We hope you'll join us again for future webinars. And thank you again so much, Sandy.